I saw my guest. Oh, there he is. Excellent. I am greatly looking forward to this conversation. I had an opportunity to look at your channel, and I was an audience member who gave me your information, Jerry Gray. And I had a hard time figuring out how to do a bio for you because you said, don't call me an expert. I'm not an expert on China. I was like, okay, I can't call the guy an expert. I would just say he was born in the UK, lived in Australia, now lives in China, loving it. And he has a tendency to put videos out smashing, let's say, propaganda against China with the reality of what it means to actually live in China, and what China is trying to accomplish in the world. I'll go with that as a bio. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. And thank you to Kevin for putting the two of us together. He's the mutual follower. So that's it's been good because, I've seen a few things of yours and I like the open-minded approach. It's good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We are under the same sky at this point, at the same time zone, so it's late for us. I want to go into, and I guess maybe the first thing I want to dip into is you. How did you, if it's okay to ask, how did you end up in China? I mean, you've been there for 21 years, which is astonishing amount of time to be there. Give us your story.
It's kind of an indicator of my age. I lived 17 years in Australia, 28 years in the UK, and now I'm not quite 21. I'm about 4 months short of 21. 21 years here in China. I came here by accident, really. I came here with a view to doing a short-term contract, 8 months. That was in 2004, and it got extended a little way. By the time I was ready to, the contract was ready to finish, I felt kind of not ready to go home. I was kind of enjoying it, which I hadn't done when I first arrived. And I have to say, China is a culture shock. I arrived in a city, a small city. There's only 4.5 million people live here. So by Chinese standards, that's quite a small city. And hardly anyone speaks English. There were not many foreigners there. There are not many foreigners now, but they went through a period where there was a lot more. Then COVID came, and then now there's a lot less. But it was kind of rare to meet a foreign face. And when you did, you kind of stop in the middle of the street and say, "What the hell are you doing here?" And then the only times you spoke English. I was working in a school, just a language teacher, and I spoke English at school. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I had a car take me home. And I spoke no English again until I went back to school, which at the weekends or the long weekends was pretty hard. And I didn't really enjoy that aspect of it. Then I started to travel a little bit and I started to enjoy it. And I went looking for a job when my contract was coming towards an end. And I found a job. And in finding that job, I became great friends with the manager of the company I was working with. And we're now 16 years married. And so that kind of changed my life a little. You
could come with your manager. That's great.
It's kind of nice. There's a little romantic story attached to that. She wasn't very interested in marrying a foreigner at the time, but we're 16 years together, or 21 years together, 20 years together, and 16 years married. And it's been great. She's heading off to Australia tomorrow for a few days, a couple of weeks, and I don't want her to go, but she's going to go and see my family as well as her. She's got a sister who lives in Australia, so and I came here and started traveling a little bit. Anytime I had free time, I'd travel. And then I did a master's degree while I was here studying what's called cross-cultural change management. And it kind of led me in a different career path. I started to become a business manager, a business consultant. I had a lot of foreign companies using me to say, look, I've got this problem with the management systems. And it wasn't an operational problem. It was a human resource problem. And you have Western management philosophy and Chinese workplace psychology, and the two things are clashing like this.
Whoa, what's that? Whoa. Stop. Stop. That's interesting.
Go back to that. Well, imagine everything you learn in an MBA course or an MA course in the UK, in America, or anywhere else in the Western world will teach you how to manage a business quite well. But then you come to China, and your human resource management is an entirely different factor. So the workplace psychology, the way people think, the way people act with different stimulus. So you and I are very different in our cultures. I mean, we're both Westerners. We both grew up in a Western society, but we both live in Asia now, or we're both in Asia.
Well,
and we must have seen, we're different, I know, but we must have seen things where you look at someone and say, why the hell did that person do that when you would have done this or I would have done that? And
Yes.
that is workplace culture, workplace psychology. That is what causes us to be different and causes those misunderstandings. When I started to look at this, behavioral psychology is really, really an important thing. I started looking at behavioral psychology in the workplace and comparing it to management philosophy from Western managers. And pretty much everything you have in the West can be turned on its head because you have a very different hierarchical structure, which means that people think differently of their boss. In Australia, we're extremely equal, very, very equal. In America, you're probably quite equal, but a little bit more hierarchical. The UK is much more hierarchical, class structured. And in China, there is the boss, and then there's everybody else. And the boss is like God in the workplace. And so
Really?
So when the boss says do something, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do it, but you'll tell the boss that you're going to do it because the boss asked you to do it. And then when it doesn't happen, the Chinese boss understands why it didn't happen, but the Western boss doesn't. And that's really where I would come in as this kind of cultural bridge between the workers in the factories and the workers doing one thing while the managers do something entirely different. And it works for a lot of companies that realized they had this problem. I didn't work with them at all, but Walmart had a massive problem when they first came to China. They almost closed. Starbucks the same. They almost closed down. They almost didn't bother because people wouldn't go shopping in Walmart because it didn't look like a Chinese supermarket. It looked like a Western supermarket, and they're not used to having their meat strapped up in polystyrene with cling film over the, what do you call it, cling wrap over the top, shrink wrap, heat wrap, whatever you call that. And people would say, well, I want to be able to pick up my meat, have a look at it, maybe even smell it. And that's how they buy meat. So they had to have their meat freshly butchered in front of them in order for it to be viable. Just things like that. So we have very different things. I was just talking to my wife about something very similar to this. She was eating steamed egg on rice. And I looked at this and thought, this is an unusual meal. And then I thought, she looks at me when I have poached eggs on toast, as if this is an unusual meal. So you see, we're both having basically the same thing. We're having a grain with an egg on it, and she's doing the same as me, just a very different cultural difference. And that was how I got into this thing where I started to see, I knew there were misunderstandings. When I came to China, 5 minutes after I arrived in China, got off the plane, I thought, no, this is not what they told me. It's very different. And within a few months, I really realized I'd been badly misinformed. And it probably took me 10 years to realize that it wasn't misinformation. It was deliberate deception.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases,
it took you 10 years to realize that they were intentionally going after China.
Yeah. Well, back in those days, or if we go back to up until about 2016, 2017, they weren't going at China. They were friends. They used to do military drills together. They used to share information and cooperate. My country, Australia, has a free trade agreement, which was signed in 2015. These kinds of things all were happening until, so it was about 10 years before the narrative started to shift from being a misunderstanding because they didn't really understand the culture to being, that's deceptive. They know that. I'm looking at the BBC and saying, well, the BBC know better. The ABC in Australia, they know better than this, but they're telling me this. And I once wrote to the ABC in Australia and told them they'd made a mistake, and I explained what it was. And another friend of mine wrote to a friend of his who worked in the ABC, and I got a call asking me if I would be willing to come on a live radio show. And I said, sure, I would. An hour later, I got an email saying, thank you for your interest, but we no longer wish to invite you to the show. And somebody had obviously done some research and said, this guy's online telling people the truth about China. So, yeah, that was how the ABC in Australia treated me. Yeah.
I agree with you, but the differences, for me, I like those differences, though. Like, I don't.
Well, yeah. It's not a case of good or bad. It's just a case of different. That's all.
Yeah.
As long as you understand the difference. Yeah.
Downstairs, for example, the grocery store, it's the meat, none of it is packaged.
No.
All of it is just sitting out. Yeah. You have like squid, chicken, crab, the works, and it's just there. Yeah. And you have to, pick it up, give it to the guy, The guy puts it in a bag and gives it to you, puts the sticker on it, you go and put your business.
Yeah, it's got a way
Like,
to put the sticker on it, yeah.
Yeah, the differences don't bother me per se.
They don't bother me.
Yeah, it's God, that's so fascinating. I'm glad to hear that. I'm curious, what do you think would be the biggest misconception as an American going to China? Like, because look, we know nothing about China. The only thing we get is propaganda from our side because China is.
I have to say, for any American who's thinking of coming to China, do it for a start, because a couple of things. One is every single thing you think you know about China is wrong. Everything. You are completely, totally, and absolutely misinformed about China. The second thing, which is probably going to be the biggest, is when Chinese people go to America, they don't feel safe. I mean, I'm not just talking about Chinese people. I'm talking about anybody walking down the street in New York, Los Angeles, and any one of 100 cities in America would probably feel a little unsafe walking down that street. Now, if you're Chinese, particularly since the first Trump era, there's this China thing, and you may very well experience some hostility. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're black, white, brown, yellow, any color you like, you can come to China and you will be accepted. If you are straight, if you're gay, if you're trans, if whatever you are, people just take you for what you are. And you are completely welcomed. Every single American that I know who comes here says, I'm surprised that there isn't more hostility because, we're quite nasty towards the Chinese. Your country as a government are quite nasty towards the Chinese. With this misinformation, there's no Uyghur repression, there is no Hong Kong democracy problems, there was never an invasion of Tibet. All the things, the Taiwan issues, all of these things that America uses to keep you misinformed about China are all very wrong. There's a grain of truth in every single one of them that is then misinterpreted, extrapolated, and provided as misinformation. That's how it is. So I would suggest the biggest thing that an American would find if they come to China is how welcome they are made. Even people, especially if they just learn to say ni hao and xie xie, how are you? Ni hao ma, how are you? Xie xie, thank you. Xie xie ni, thank you very much, basically. And when they, or xie xie ah, if you say the ah at the end, people, oh, you can really speak Chinese. I don't know why they think that. Oh, they'll say, speak Chinese so well. I just said thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm functional in Chinese after all this time, of course, but to be told, wow, you're so good at Chinese, I'm not. I just get by.
I've only had the opportunity to be on the 12-hour, 24-hour pass. And that was...
They do a 10-day pass now, 10-day visa. So for you as an American with an American passport, you can come to China as long as you have transit out and stay 10 days, but you can only stay in the region where you transit in. So if you fly into Beijing, Beijing's a big place. You fly into Shanghai, same thing. I think if you fly into Hong Kong, you can come across into Guangdong and the Greater Bay Area and stay, and that's like 20 cities, that area. So you can stay quite a way. That's a 10-day transit visa. There are now, I think, 78 countries in total. There are 190 countries in the world, and 78 are 30-day visa-free. And then there's the island of Hainan, which is visa-free to almost everyone. You can go to visit the island of Hainan, and that's quite a large island. It's like a 1.5-hour fast train ride from the top end to the bottom end. And there's 2 major cities and hundreds of villages and small towns that are well worth traveling through. So you can do a 30-day visa-free entry into Hainan. I think almost any country can do that. So that's worth doing.
Good to know. That is good to know, because I've wanted to visit for a while. I mean, I'm going to be in Malaysia for about 3 months. Okay. But I did want to hit China for a period of time because
please do. If you're flying somewhere else and you fly through China, then there's no problem getting in for a few days. Very easy. If you're not flying somewhere else, then you need to be on a visa. I mean, you can get a visa to visit China. That's not an issue. You can get a 1-year tourist visa and they will welcome you. But if you don't want to go through the hassles of that, and an American doesn't get the 30-day visa-free. Australians do, British don't. I mean, I live here on a residence visa anyway, so that's not a big deal for me. But anyone can come from, I think it's 78 countries now. It changes all the time. It's very fast changing.
Let me. What do we get wrong about Taiwan? Like meaning
Taiwan. Okay.
Taiwan, because for right now
Yeah.
the U.S. has apparently troops in Taiwan. The United States claims to acknowledge the one China policy, but obviously they're salami slicing, trying to create a provocation, something similar to Ukraine. And they're trying to do something. So basically, we're trying to use Taiwan as a proxy in a very similar way. And I know people in China says Taiwan is not Ukraine. Agreed. Fair enough. Taiwan is part of China. Ukraine is not necessarily part of Russia, so fair enough.
Well,
but we're using it in a similar way, in this notion of...
It's actually not similar at all. The Taiwan issue is an unresolved civil war. There has never been an end. Same in Korea. There's never been an end to their civil war. In Vietnam, they had an end to their North-South war, which is not technically a civil war. It was an anti-imperial war. So again, they're different too. Now, when you come to Taiwan, the situation with Taiwan is in 1949, a group of people who called themselves, and legitimately, because they had won a revolution, called themselves the Republic of China, legitimately were the government of China, but they were defeated in a civil war. Now, when you have a civil war and it's resolved, it's over. America had a civil war, it's resolved. Now imagine this, a Confederate state having an island. And this is what the Civil War is here. The Confederate government, because you did have a Confederate government, took all of the treasury of the South and moved it to this island off the coast of Florida. Let's call it Guantanamo Bay, for example, and moved this government off the coast and said, we are the government of America. That's what this is. This is not like Hawaii, which was occupied, colonized, taken over, and militarily occupied. It's not like that at all. This is a civil war that didn't finish, and it's still not finished. Now, why didn't it finish? Because America stepped in and said, look, we don't want this to finish. And China was devastated by 8 years of World War II. The World War II started in 1937, not 1939, and not 1943 or whatever it was when Pearl Harbor was attacked. World War II started in 1937, in July 1937. It was July, when there was what they call the Marco Polo Bridge incident. That's what we call it in English. And that started the World War. So they had 8 years of World War before Japan pulled out. Now, Japan were defeated, roundly defeated, mostly by the Americans in places like the Philippines and Okinawa, which was not part of Japan at the time. It was the Ryukyu Islands, and it had a different name, different nationality, different cultures, all of those things. Then from 1945 to 1949, there was a civil war inside of China, and the communists won. Why did they win? They won because the army, in many cases, deserted en masse with their generals and went to the other side, because that side was promising a better life than the current side, the side that we call the KMT. And they took all the treasury loot and went across to Taiwan and said, we are the government of China and we'll be back. They did a MacArthur who said that. Patton, I can't remember. One of your famous generals says, "I'll be back."
MacArthur,
and it was Terminator too. But the idea was they were going to be, for a period of time, reconsolidating, getting themselves sorted out, and then they were going to come back. And it never happened. They never quite got to that, and China couldn't. China didn't have the wherewithal. It didn't have the troop. It had the troops. It didn't have the navy. It didn't have the money. It didn't have the equipment. And it couldn't go across and take Taiwan back. And it couldn't do that because America sailed ships in there and said, you're not going to do that. We're going to help Taiwan because they're the democratic. And they weren't democratic at all. They were never democratic. They were an autocratic civil war winner, or not a civil war, a rebellion against the Qing dynasty. So let's get that into perspective. The KMT were never democratic. Right the way through the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, into the 1990s, the KMT were never democratic. The only reason Taiwan has any form of democracy is because the National Endowment for Democracy pays for it. Washington pays for this. So this is why it's rankling with China at the moment. Now, the one most important factor is that China has never, ever, and I would challenge anybody to challenge me on this, China has never said, we will take Taiwan by a certain date. Never, not once.
Wait, are you saying that China never said they were going to take Taiwan by 2027? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, I'm saying that. China has never said that. America has said that China said that. But it's American assumptions that they can understand what Xi Jinping is thinking. But again, let's go back to my workplace psychology. They haven't got a clue what Xi Jinping thinks, because with the same set of stimulus, they would do this. But China is not stimulated by the same things. China is Confucian. China has studied the art of war, Sun Tzu's art of war. China knows that the best war, the best battle is the one you don't fight, the one you win without fighting. And that is how they will take back Taiwan. They will wait and wait and wait. And eventually Taiwan will say, what the hell are we doing? It's so much better on the other side of the lake. That's what it is. That's what China will do. Now, all of this stuff about China is going to... How many times have you heard Iran is only months or weeks away from a nuclear bomb? I've heard that since 1995. Now, we've been hearing since 1979, I think it is, when the Taiwan Relations Act was written. And that was written so that Nixon could renege on a promise. This is a thing that a lot of people don't realize. Every time the president makes a promise, Congress and the Supreme Court have the ability to overturn that presidential promise. So if the president signs an agreement, Congress says, we're going to make a law, and that law will be supported by our courts, and whatever the president said back then is no longer valid. So in 1976, when Nixon signed the declaration, I think it's called the Shanghai Agreement, and let's go back to the Cairo Declaration in 1943 or 44, and then there's a Potsdam Declaration, all of these declarations that said Taiwan belongs to China. There is no dispute about that. So what's the dispute if China, the recognized country of China in the United Nations and by the United States, says we want to take Taiwan back? Why would that be a war? That would just be the ending of the Civil War. If China were to invade, the rest of the world have nothing to do with this. This is a civil war. Did China get involved in 1860s when you guys were fighting? No, they didn't. They weren't interested in what you were doing there. They were busy trying to get through this century of humiliation that Britain and the European and Americans had forced upon them at that time. The century of humiliation started with opium wars and stuff like that. But China doesn't really want anybody's involvement in this. It is an internal Chinese affair. China has never, and I will challenge anybody to find me a Chinese government official who has said, we're ready to attack Taiwan. What they have said is, we're ready to defend Taiwan, which is a recognized, United Nations recognized part of China. So when Elbridge Colby comes in and says to Australia and Korea, less to Korea, but more to Japan and Australia, we want to know what your commitment is for if there is a war against Taiwan. What he needs to say is, if we go to war with Taiwan, what are you going to do about it? Because the moment he says that, he's refusing to recognize, he's a government official. And if the US government officials are refusing to recognize that Taiwan is part of China, that is what will trigger an event where China, rightfully, legally, under international law, takes back a disputed territory that has been held by the losers of the Chinese Civil War since 1949. So that's why it's very important.
You are being far too logical and far too honest in your take on this. And as you know, most of the stuff has nothing to do with honesty or anything else. It has to do with just empire will. Meaning the US is, from the point of view of the United States, we are an empire in decline. We see China has very nice things. We see them building stuff all the time. We see them with high-speed rail. We see them with drone parades that are just mind-blowing to watch. We see massive cities, and we don't have those things, which means...
Can I add to a few things to this that you're not seeing?
Please.
Did you know that China has just developed an aviation engine that will travel at Mach 16? This is not a bomb. This is not a bomb. This is a general aviation. This can go into an airplane. And in the next 10 or 12 years, they will have this in operation. It's not going to happen this week, next week, but they're going to have a plane that will travel 20,000 kilometers an hour. That means they can go around the world in an hour effectively, or they can go anywhere in the world within the hour. You can have breakfast. You can get up in the morning, have breakfast in London, lunch in morning tea in New York, and back for lunch in Beijing with this plane. That's one thing. Did you know that they've cured cancer? They've cured asthma. They've cured diabetes. They've even regrown organs into the bodies of people who have needed kidney transplants and now no longer need kidney transplants.
Have they?
They have done all of this, and it is published, and your media are not telling you. And why are they not telling you this? They're not telling you this because they know that if they tell you this, you'll say, why can't we do that? Why can't we have a cure? There are 500 million, apparently, people who require insulin, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, who require insulin. And China now has cured that. Now, it's not in general use. It's still in clinical trial phases. But China has found a way to regenerate insulin in the body with genetics. And they're doing it. They're doing it now. Now, unfortunately, it's too late for a lot of people. But the moment that it gets put onto the market, pharma are going to be saying, big pharma, pharmaceuticals, are going to be saying, this is not safe, this is dangerous, this is but at what cost? China is curing diabetes, but, they killed 30 people in the process. Well, 500 million people benefit from the process that might kill a few people in the clinical trials, which is what their vaccines and things have been doing for years. So it's not like they're gonna highlight the negatives of it, because they never highlight their own negatives. But
nobody's going to care. If you cure diabetes or if you grow a kidney, nobody's going to care.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Now, in the process of getting to that, some people might have reacted and they've learned from that, but effectively now they have all of these things. So, we don't hear about this. Did you know that China has just recently launched an oil tanker with sails that saves 6,000 tons of oil? No, it's 6 tons of oil a day. So something like 6,000 tons over the journey of this ship from the Middle East to get some oil back to China and back to the Middle East. It's thousands and thousands of tons, not barrels, tons of oil, because they put up these great big sails that go one way or another. And China's just released this. China is doing all these kinds of things, and nobody in the West knows. I've written script for 2 videos for my channel, Jerry's Take on China. And in these 2 scripts, one of them is called, What Else Are They Not Telling Us? And that is a really big thing. You're not being told what China's achieving. You're only being told what are clearly obvious and what are easy to be seen, because vloggers are showing it all over the place. But go through the medical publications, go through the science and technology journals, read what's on Chinese media, not Western media, and you'll see it's amazing. This is not just me saying, oh, look, China is amazing. This is science, technology, every single thing that you can think of in terms of advancements of human nature, human lifestyle, human beings, everything, all being improved here in China. And it was a dirty place when I came here. Come now and you see blue skies. People are swimming in rivers, fishing from rivers in the cities. I live in the Greater Bay Area, right in the middle of the Greater Bay Area. Geographically, I'm literally right in the middle. Yet I can go fishing in my local river, catch a fish and eat it. This is the largest manufacturing zone in the world by a long, long way. And I can catch fish and eat it from my local river without any treatment, just eat it, and it's okay. That's quite amazing when you think about where they were 20, 30 years ago. And you still see the BBC do this very well. Grainy, dirty pictures of Beijing. I was in Beijing 2 weeks ago. The skies are brilliantly blue and clear. It's like, what's the word? Sapphire blue skies. I was in Mongolia a little while ago. They talk about dust storms. I rode a bike across China. You can probably still see I've got a little bit white hand and slightly brown.
Yes, I do. I do.
I also have brown fingers, but they've eased off a little bit. But yeah, the color changes because I'm getting sunburn in this supposedly smoggy, dirty place. It's just quite incredible how misinformed we are about the country that I live in. And I see it every single day, and I'm trying to put that right.
Well, they do it purely for the explicit reason of a coming conflict. Meaning, look, I agree with you, right? That for all intents and purposes, China has marked advancement in a way that the US and the way our political system just doesn't allow. Like there's a level of competence that's coming out of the Chinese government that doesn't come out of the US government, whatever the US government says. So from our point of view, we look at that and say, okay, we are going to lose our primacy if China, Russia, Iran, and let's say the globe goes in a particular direction that the globe is effectively going. We need to stop China, Russia, India, Iran, et cetera, from going in that direction. And there are certain prongs, let's say touchstones, China being one of the primary ones for that. So a lot of this stuff seems to be done just in order to create the pretext for a conflict. It's like, oh my God, China's militarizing the Red Sea. China is taking over so-and-so. The United States has like 900 bases all around the world. China is like 2. And we're still screaming that China is militarizing.
1.
And so that
That's
seems to be the objective. And I guess my thing is, how does China deal with that? I have spoken to plenty of people from China, and they have this talk about cultural differences. I play chess and I go, and they would say, well, you just have to wait it out. And it's like,
it's pragmatism.
Yeah, but Taiwan, and the reason why I say Taiwan is similar to Ukraine, not for the geopolitical reasons, meaning not for historical context reasons,
just
but because
for
of the way it's being
US
used.
proxy. Yeah.
Exactly. And effectively, we have military in Taiwan right now, which is massively provocative. We've been given weapons.
It's even worse than that because Taiwan is 130 kilometers off the coast.
Exactly.
But
which is my point.
There is a place called Kinmen County in Taiwan. Kinmen County has a range of islands, and one of them is only 3 kilometers from Xiamen. I've not been on it, but I've seen it. I've been into Xiamen, and you can see this island from the coast. And that is where US military soldiers are based. Kinmen Island, which is part of Kinmen County. And if you take a look at it, take a large scale map, and you know those maps that show Taiwan and China in different colors? Okay. Yeah. China doesn't like that at all. But what it does do sometimes, it produces maps that show the provinces in different colors. When you look at the province of Taiwan, look right over at the coast. And that's probably the other way around on your screen because I'm looking at a camera here.
You're fine.
Go all the way to the coast and you'll see 3 or 4 dotted islands, the same color as Taiwan and a different color to Fujian, which is the province that's there. So this is what people don't know. There's another thing people don't know. Afghanistan has a border with Xinjiang. Americans don't know that. You were having a war in Afghanistan. You're right on China's border. And this is the area where America were telling people it's a troubled area and those people want independence. They didn't want independence. They were getting funded to want independence. But that's a different story. The Taiwan Islands are literally right up nestled next to the coast.
How does China wait that out? Because that's what it boils down to.
Because they know it's a pragmatism. They know. It's the same in Africa. You go to Africa and ask any African, what do you think of China? Oh, we love China. Go to the Western media and say, what does Africa think of China? Oh, they hate China. You know, exploitation, debts, and all this. None of that is true. It is not true at all. So China just says time is on our side. We can wait 1,000 years for this because we have 5,000 years of history. America has only, again, let's go back to my behavioral psychology in the workplace. An American corporation relies on quarterly figures.
Right.
Chinese corporations don't. They don't care. But you see this all the time. The high-speed rail is losing money. No, it's not. The high-speed rail track might be losing money. The train station might be costing the government money. but tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who live along that track are now better off, and they're now tax-paying contributors to society. And so society is paying for this thing that one economist in America says that's costing China a lot of money. They can't sustain that, because they wouldn't sustain it. Same set of stimulus, different result. They would not be able to sustain a corporation that had a train line that was losing money, even if it was benefiting tens or hundreds or millions of people on that train line. And that is why China can wait, because China doesn't need to have its results this week, next week. And its return on investment is not how much are we going to make on this in the next 5 years? It's what's the benefit to the people in the next 50 years? How long will this train line be here before we upgrade it, change it, do whatever? What's the benefit to the people on the ends of it and in the middle of it? That's how China views things. So China knows that Africa is benefiting enormously from hospitals, from roads, from colleges, from government buildings. The CDC building in Africa, the African CDC, was built by China. The government offices of half a dozen different countries gifted by China to help that government to set itself up to mutually benefit both countries.
Right.
They didn't go in there. I mean, how did your ancestors get from Africa to America? China's never done that. There's no slavery in China. Now, there may be some bad apples in this, and there may be some bad employers. There may be some thieves in there. But overall, the massive amount of benefit that Africa gets from China and the 53 countries that recognize China out of the 54, which all came to China last year, they are doing business with Africa and China in their own currencies. SWIFT isn't part of this. CIPS, which is a SWIFT alternative, they're doing it in their own currencies. They're doing some of it in dollars. They are doing business in China. So China's saying, we don't need to tell the world. I'll do it for them, for China, but the government doesn't need to tell the world, because the world knows. You think about America, 330 million people. Add the UK, add Australia. Canada has just come out and said, we need to divest our interests in America and deal more with China. This was a headline yesterday. So they now know America is unstable right now. America is inefficient right now. We know that. America is corrupt right now. America is involved in almost every military dispute that's going on, every conflict that's going on in the world. America is involved. China is going into loads and loads of places, building roads, building schools, building colleges, building hospitals, building government offices, building ports, and saying, can we buy your iron ore from you at market prices? The French are going in there and saying, we want your iron ore or your uranium, and this is all we're prepared to pay for it. Yeah. That's the very difference between our two countries. China doesn't need to do anything in a hurry. It will wait its time. 4% of the world live in America. They're grossly misinformed. About 15% of the rest of the world are the English-speaking white Anglo-Saxon, the New Zealands, Australias, Canadas, Europe, effectively, and the UK. These are the white Anglo-Saxon countries. They are about 15% of the world. So about 18 to 19% of the world are misinformed, and the rest of the world are doing great business. Even the European Union is doing great business.
Fascinating breakdown. I was in Kenya. This was so many years ago with my ex-wife. I have a tendency to talk to random people when I was at a casino.
Don't we all?
Yeah, right. And, you see it when you're in Africa. Like, you could see it in the newspaper. You could see it in the casino. They had, like, Chinese casinos specifically.
Yeah, that's because the Chinese love to gamble and they can't do it here.
Oh, they can't do it in China. Well, they do it in Kenya. They do it in Kenya.
They can go to Macau, but gambling is illegal in China. Mainland China.
Interesting. Yeah. They had plenty of casinos in Kenya. But you could see it. Like, you could see the building, the architecture, the businesses that were being created, the investment that was taking place just in Kenya alone. And you can extrapolate that to the rest of Africa.
You can, pretty much, with one exception, and that's the tiny country of Eswatini. which used to be called Swaziland, and that's the only country in Africa. There's 54 countries. One of them recognizes Taipei as the capital of China. And as a result of that, Eswatini gets... Here's another thing. I bet you didn't hear about this. Every single country in Africa, except Eswatini, has a free trade agreement with China now.
Right.
Everyone. They pay no tariffs, no taxes, nothing. Everything that they export into China, tax-free.
This is soft power. That's what this is. Yeah. Right.
Well, I mean, how is Trump going to compete with that when he has 4 or 5... I think he had Gabon, Guinea-Bissau,
Liberia.
He had 5, I think, African leaders, and he was doing this. Wind it up. I'm not interested in hearing what you've got to say. Just give me your name. Oh, you speak Liberia. You speak excellent English.
Right.
Liberia was I'm not going to say the word.
No, please explain it. No, explain it. Explain it. Liberia. You give a really good explanation of this.
Okay,
please.
Back in the 1860s, before you had a civil war in America, there were some liberals who decided that freed slaves could be repatriated back to Africa, and they created a colony. Now, think of the word Liberia, and if I was an English teacher for a while, liberty, Liberia, they're connected. So this was a free state on the west coast of Africa. Sierra Leone is another place. These places were created so that American slaves could be repatriated to Africa, and they had their own colony. It was a colony. And then they gained independence, but they, for a while, were a British colony too. But they gained independence. So they came from America to create this country, which wasn't a country then, but is now. And since the 1860s, the only language of that country is English. And then Trump says, oh, your English is really good. Where did you learn it? And the guy, what? What an insult. That is why Africans are not going to say, we love Trump. No African in their right mind is going to say we love Trump and we want America to help us. It's not going to happen. And you've got all of these African leaders now coming to China every year. It's every second year it's hosted in China, and every second year it's hosted in Africa. They have an annual conference of the African leaders, and they just come here, sign deals, talk about how they can cooperate. Why is Kenya paying Nigeria in US dollars for trade coming across the border? That kind of thing. And so now they're saying, well, we can do it in our own currencies, and we do it through CIPS instead of SWIFT. And this is why America is so angry with China right now. China is enabling exploited countries, the global South, to become their own. China has done nothing except ask for, in its entire history, all it's ever asked for is equality in the United Nations. Why should a country, just because it has 4% of the population and 20% of the global wealth, why should that country have more power than a country that has 20% of the population and 4% of the global wealth, which is where China was 50 years ago? That's what China is trying to say. It shouldn't be reversed just because of this. We should all be equal. Every single country should have one vote. And you shouldn't be able to exploit and influence, negatively influence. Influence is okay. There's nothing wrong with foreign influence. Everybody does it. But when you're negatively influencing, you shouldn't be able to coerce countries into making decisions that they don't want to make and aren't in their best interest. And that's what America has been doing for 70 years. So that's why China is so vocal. China put a white paper out about it. They don't want to restructure the United Nations. They never have wanted to. What they do want is the United Nations Charter and its rules to apply to everybody equally, which currently they don't.
No, they don't. They don't at all. If they did, they wouldn't be a BRICS. If they did, they wouldn't have these different systems.
BRICS is now, I think, 44% of the world's population. And there's another misinformation thing there. BRICS has got India and China in it, and Western media keep perpetuating this myth that India and China are kind of in some kind of conflict. They're not. They have disagreements. Their border disagreements stem back to the McMahon Line of 110 years ago, when a British guy called McMahon drew a line across what was part of China, Tibet, and then said, this is in India, and this China can keep the rest. And this was why China never invaded Tibet because the Dalai Lama, who was the ruler of Tibet, invited China in to help repel these people who shouldn't be in his territory. It's all part of China. He was serving, at the time, he was serving on the National People's Congress of China. Another thing people don't know about, the Dalai Lama, for more than 10 years, he was the vice chair of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of China. He would go to Beijing every year. You didn't know. A lot of people don't know this. So how can you say Tibet is not part of China when the governor of that province, I know it's not a province and he's not a governor, he was the Dalai Lama, and China created the Tibetan Autonomous Region, which we now call Xinjiang because it's more appropriate, because Tibet is much bigger than the land that is called, with a border around a modern day border, Tibet. There's a whole place called the Tibetan Plateau, which is part of Sichuan province, part of Qinghai province, and it goes into Yunnan province. So it's a much bigger area. There are Tibetan people all over that area. And there's Tibetan autonomous regions, which are not in what we call Tibet. They're outside of Tibet, but they're Tibetan people and they're governed by Tibetan people, local counties run by Tibetans for Tibetans who live outside of Tibet. But, there's a lot of stuff going on that you just don't get to hear about. But the McMahon line drew a line across Tibet. The Dalai Lama invited, and I've seen a copy of the letter, it still exists, invited Mao to come in with his military and help him to repel. This was not an invasion. This was a liberation of Tibet. Now, what then happened? That was in 1951-52. What then happened was Mao said, we're a socialist country now. You have to remove serfdom. You have to get rid of the lords who own the land and the people who work on it. And the Dalai Lama said, no, I'm not changing the structure of Tibet. The structure of Tibet is we, the monks, have the power. The power is divested in us by our gods. They're not really gods, by our philosophy. And those people who own the land own the people who live on the land. It was a form of serfdom. It goes back to medieval Britain. In the case of, you had the Shire Eve, which the word became your American sheriff, and you had the lords and the lairds. They owned the land, and the people were tied to the land and had to work, and they paid taxes to the lord, and they didn't, once they were born on that land, that's where they stayed. Same thing was happening in Tibet. And Mao went in and said, no, this is not going to happen. The CIA exploited this and said, well, the best thing you can do is get out and we'll fight from outside. So they took hundreds of Tibetans across the border, took them to Colorado, where they have mountains that are very similar, and trained a military force and parachuted them back into Tibet. You didn't know this? This is
I did not. I swear to God, I did not. I'm fascinated by this. No, please.
It's a 70-year-old story. This is what they've been doing, and they've been doing it for so long that they've even forgotten that they used to do it. But this is documented. I'm not making this up as a story.
I don't think you're making it up. I mean, we do the same thing now in Ukraine, for God's sake. I mean, we take them to Britain, take them to CIA headquarters, train them up, send them back into Ukraine, and have them, fight. We did kill squads, South America. I mean, this is a trope. It's normal.
Yeah,
unfortunately, well, I just didn't know what they did with Tibet.
They started practicing this in the 1950s in Tibet, in China. There you go. And I mean, this is documented by the CIA. I don't make this stuff up. The CIA have released documents that say this has happened. And there's been books written about it. The Dalai Lama's brother has written a book about it. The Dalai Lama has even gone on record and said Tibet is part of China. I just want it to have its own autonomy, but it's part of China. That's his view on it. I don't know what will happen when he dies. I think that's a perfect opportunity for the CIA to stick another dagger in and twist it around, and that's exactly what they're going to do.
You got to give me a take on that now that you brought this up. That's fascinating because the audience may not know. The Dalai Lama often effectively talks about his next incarnation.
Yes.
And in the context of this next incarnation, they go out, they find the person, they bring the person back, the person becomes the new Dalai Lama. Yep. China has said effectively, hey, we want a say in that, which is mind-blowing. Okay, so what did they say? What did they explain?
What China said is Tibet, which is part of China, has a 100-year-long history of how to choose the Dalai Lama. We, as a country, want to honor that history. That's all they've said. We will honor. Now, this is America saying, China is always culturally appropriating what they call cultural genocide in certain areas. It's taking away the language, which is another story that they don't do. Yeah. But China has said the process of selecting the Dalai Lama has hundreds and hundreds of years of precedent, and we will recognize that precedent. When Tibet is ready to select the Dalai Lama, we will recognize their selection. That's what they're saying. They're not saying we want a part of this and we're going to select the Dalai Lama. They're saying there is a process. It goes into a golden urn and lots are drawn, and then they have to find things that the Dalai Lama owned that this new child has got. All of these things are part of a hundreds of years old process that China says, this is our culture. It's Chinese. It's Tibetan, but Tibetans are Chinese. I've been to Tibet and I've asked them, do you consider yourself Chinese? Yeah. Why? Why wouldn't we? We live in China.
I just want to nail this part down, though. So just to be very clear, brimmingly clear, China is not saying we want any part of this. We're letting them do what they do. And I think they may bristle at this idea that you're letting us do what we do. But effectively, China is not trying to get a role in this.
China will bristle if, what Dalai Lama has said is he wants his financial controllers in Switzerland to make the choice. Well, how can that be a culturally religious historical precedent that starts there? What China is saying now, all religion in China comes under the auspices of the government. Now, the government and the CPC are not the same thing, but we could have another hour-long debate about that. That's a different story. The government and the CPC are not the same thing. The Communist Party is the party, and it provides much of the government, but not all of it. These are different things. So the government is run by two different things, the CPPCC and the NPC. Let's not get too deep into this, because as soon as I go off on this, we're off on a different tangent.
Okay,
the government and the party are not the same thing. They are just very, very closely intertwined and both want to do the right thing for China in their own individual ways. Now, two things that are very, very important in China: governance and CPC. The party, generally speaking, does the government, but they're not the same thing. Let's put that one into a little perspective, but we'll put that to one side. People might have questions, and I'm happy to answer them if they come back on a different show. But we'll get really bogged down if we try and get into how democracy works in China. So when you have these two things that are kind of in conflict with each other, but also agreeing with each other, you've got this situation where every single province has its own governance, and each governor is matched with a party secretary. So there is a party secretary in Xinjiang. There is a party secretary in Tibet. There's a party secretary in Inner Mongolia, which these are autonomous regions. And the party secretary might be Han Chinese, but the governor and all of the officials will be ethnic minorities in the region. So the governance is done by those people. And what China is saying about this Tibetan Dalai Lama issue is there is a historical precedent. We will honor the historical precedent, and we're not going to listen to a financial CEO in Switzerland who says, I know who the new Dalai Lama is. That's the important thing. Now, having said that, religion is governed by the government. So you have freedom of religion, freedom of choice, but the religion is also, I would say, controlled in a minimalistic way. Now, people say there's no freedom of religion. That's bull. There is a lot of freedom of religion in China. There are thousands. My wife is a Buddhist. My wife's mother is a Taoist. I know Catholics. I know Protestants. I know Jews, but there's no Chinese Jew that I know. I know Mongolians who are Muslims. I know Uyghurs who are Muslims. I know Kazakhs who are Muslims. And I know Han Chinese who are Muslims. There's a lot of Muslims in China, and a lot of mosques as well. They get a degree of control in that all of the people who make speeches, sermons, preachers, they must all follow a line that says, you can have your religion, but the country is important. If your religion starts to say, we want to divide this country away from us, like there are some Uyghurs who were Muslims and wanted separatism, that's when the government comes in and says, you're not getting separatism. End of story. And they clamp down on it. There's the element of truth for the Xinjiang Uyghur genocide, which never ever happened. If anyone can name me a single person who's been genocided, let alone a village, a town, or a city that's been razed to the ground, it's never happened. It doesn't happen. So, I mean, it's just bullshit to say that there is a genocide going on. There's not even a cultural genocide, because if you go to Xinjiang, as I have many times, I've cycled on a bicycle 5,000 kilometers inside of Xinjiang. Xinjiang is bigger than France and Spain together. It's big.
Wow.
And so I've cycled across it. I've flown into it and cycled out of it. I've been there several times on different holidays. I've been by train, by plane, by car, and by bicycle, and I've come out by bicycle as well. So I know a little bit about this region, and there's great ethnic diversity. There is no oppression of Islam. There's no oppression of Uyghur culture. There's no oppression of Uyghur language. It's everywhere. People are talking, and switch on the television in your hotel room is Uyghur language. Get in a taxi, the driver's listening to Uyghur language. Half the people who live in the province, or the region, because it's not a province, it's an autonomous region, are Uyghurs. And same thing in Mongolia. When you go to Inner Mongolia, a lot of Inner Mongolians, Mongolian people, Mongolian writing, Mongolian language, but the Han Chinese who live there don't understand it, but it's there. So again, we're talking about ethnically different regions that still have their own culture. Now, we got diversified away from the comment about the Dalai Lama. If the Dalai Lama chooses somebody who is not through the correct process, the culturally correct process, then China will not recognize that person. They will recognize the person through the correct process. Now, if that person starts to say Tibet needs to be separated, then China will clamp down, because that is illegal. In the same way that it's illegal in your country to say, I think we should have a civil war and separate the North from the South, because that's what happened. That's what China's trying to avoid, another civil war.
Wow. Okay. No, you're fine. Okay. So the Dalai Lama wanted bankers to choose the next Dalai Lama.
Yeah, he's putting the matter into the hands of his financial controllers who are in Switzerland.
And why is he doing that?
I think probably because the CIA have suggested it to him, and he's a 90-year-old man who doesn't have the resolve to say, no, this is stupid. Now, if I was him, I'd be saying to China, can I come back and die there? That's what I'd be saying if I was him. And of course, the CIA would never allow that, I'm sure. And he would literally have to cross the mountains again to get back into China. The CIA are not going to let him come back to China. It would be a terrible loss of 70 years of propaganda. The worst thing possible that could happen is if the Dalai Lama returns to China and dies in China. It would be the worst possible.
By the way, where is he now? He's
in Dar es Salaam, I think it's called. Not Dar es Salaam, that's in Africa. He's in northern India. They have a Tibetan. It's not even an autonomous region. It's part of India where all the Tibetans have an enclave. Wow. He crossed the mountains in 1959, I think. I was 1 year old, so I wasn't keeping up with the news that day. But he crossed the mountains in 1959 and never returned to China. And he crossed with the military. I mean, it's an interesting thing. He's one of the few people who is an exile from China who actually left China as an exile. He didn't get a passport and walk out of the country. That's another thing you need to ask about the Uyghurs and all of those people, the Hong Kongers and the people who say, China has oppressed me. Well, how did you get out of China? Oh, I flew out of Chengdu, or I flew out of Guangzhou, or I crossed the border into Hong Kong. Yeah, but did you have a passport? Who gave you the passport? The country that you're saying is persecuting you. They gave you a passport.
Wow.
I rest my case on that one. And that's another thing. Not one of the KMT that went to Taiwan needed to produce a passport to get in. None of them have refugee status. They were Chinese people fleeing the mainland of China to an island of China, and they took over the island as the Republic of China. That's why Taiwan is separated. That's the only reason. That and 137 miles or kilometers of ocean.
What do you think of these people? Right now, the United States helped ISIS effectively knock over the Syrian government. And some of the people who helped do that were Uyghurs. They were literal Uyghurs, like got beards, terrorists, etc. And they said very clearly, and now we're going back to China.
Good luck. That's all I would say. You're not going to get near China. I mean, how are they going to get into China?
But that gives the clear impression of why China had an issue with some of these terrorist groups that the U.S. was acting like,
I don't know how many times I could say this, but not a lot of people know this. This is a great line from a guy called Michael Caine, an actor in the UK, would say, not a lot of people know this. And then go on to tell you something. Not a lot of people know this, but that group are still recognized terrorists by the United Nations, by Australia, by the United Kingdom. Mike Pompeo struck them off the designated State Department list in his last day or 2 days as the Secretary of State back in the first Trump era. He struck them off because he said there's no evidence that they're still terrorists. And now, of course, there is clear evidence that they are still terrorists. So a lot of them came through Turkey on false passports. Turkey gave them passports, got them out. I don't understand Turkey at all. 1 minute, I think Turkey's on our side. The next minute, Turkey's our enemy. I mean, I'm not talking about mine or China's or America's. It's everybody. Turkey is like, it goes like that. One day is one side and the next day is the next. I know that Turkey needs to support Russia one day, but it needs to support Syria another day. I don't know what's going on with Turkey. I mean, I don't follow that closely, but it just seems to me they change their socks and their pants as often as they change their minds. So they left China with Turkish passports, which were then taken away from them, and they were sent down to the Syrian border as fighters. And that's what they are now. They are terrorist fighters. They're recognized as terrorists by a lot of people. Now, here's a very interesting thing. Back a few years ago in the UK, when the Hamas thing happened on October the 7th, one of the British politicians, Priti Patel, said, it is against the law to wave, she's Indian background, Priti is P-R-I-T-I. It's against the law to wave a Palestinian flag in London because you'll be putting terror into the hearts of the Jewish people, the Jewish community. Now, okay, that's fair. No, it's not fair because Palestine and the Palestinian flag are recognized by the United Nations.
Yes.
But in the same period of time, she was hosting Uyghurs who were waving the ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, or ETIP flag. The ETIM, ETIP, they're basically the same. I mean, there's some difference in their membership and their structure, but they're basically the same people. They're terrorists. They're recognized terrorists. But because they're terrorists against China, they're our freedom fighters. So it was okay to wave around an ETIM flag when there is probably 1 million Chinese people living in London. But it's not okay to, and that's a terrorist flag, recognized terrorist flag by the United Nations and the United Kingdom, but it's not okay to wave the nation's flag of Palestine, which is recognized by the United Nations as being this. And then I know they're not a full nation with nationhood, but they are a territory that's recognized by the United Nations and they have their own flag. Wave that flag, you commit an offense. Wave ETIM's flag and they're terrorists and you don't. Wow. I mean, I was dumbfounded when that announcement was made. How can this? Lawyers everywhere must be looking at this and go, wow, we're going to get some court cases here. This is money, money, money for us.
See, it doesn't matter. Like rules-based order. Rules, like they make it up as they go along. Yeah. They make it up as they go along. I was asked
once to define the difference between rules-based order and the law-based order. I said, well, law-based order follows laws that are written. Rules-based order is just made up and it's not written anywhere. It's whatever we want it to be. We're powerful and this is our order.
Yeah. Yes. It's that when we're looking at China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, it's that we make it up as we go along.
Syria.
Jerry, man, I have learned so much from you. This is fantastic. And
you do this again.
I would love for you to come back on the show. We have a huge crowd at this point. I think we're what, 12:43. The numbers have only ticked up the entire time you've been talking. So
Nice to
clearly the
hear.
public is interested. Thank you for this, man. And just so the audience will know, Jerry Gray, he is from the UK, lived in Australia, is now living in China.
British-born Australian citizen, 20 years living in China, resident of China, and I can be found on a place called Jerry's Take on China on YouTube.
Yes, I wrote that down. I had the opportunity to go through your stuff. Very informative. A really good show and a really good channel.
I try and support my statements with genuine facts. It's very hard to prove me wrong. If you can prove me wrong, I'm happy to make an apology. But I get called a lot of names because I'm this CCP supporter. This is not a great thing. However, people, when they come to China and look at what the CPC, not the CCP, but the CPC has done, then you go, wow, I see why this guy supports this. And ask China, don't ask me. Come to China and ask Chinese people what they think. See what they think. They're the people who count, not me. I have an opinion.
I mean, that's the wild part, right? Like in the US, they say, well, Chinese people are robots. And it's like, why do you think that? Because 90% or whatever backs the government. And it's like, okay, is it because the government is competent in a way that in the US it's not? Like you don't get that level of support for the government. In fact, you get this kind of, I don't want to call it nihilism, but this kind of remoteness from the government. Yeah.
I've got a couple of statements. I know we're going to get away, but I'm going to finish off with a couple of statements for you. One of them is this: China does not build its great infrastructure in order to gain popularity. It gains and keeps popularity because that's what it does. That's one thing. The Chinese government does not profit from our misbehavior. It manages our behavior. This is why people think China's authoritarian. China manages our behavior. There's lots of cameras everywhere. There are lots of police, but I don't know anyone who's been arrested. I don't know anyone who's been to prison. China has 1/4 of the number of prisoners that America has with 4 times the population, or maybe half the number of prisoners with 4 times the population. Let's get that accurate. So in the West, they make laws and they profit from your misbehavior. In China, they make laws and they manage your behavior without profiting from it. And there's a really big difference between how you look at why China is authoritarian. It's not. It's basically a disciplined hierarchical structure that exists and has done for several thousand years. In America, they don't have that history of hierarchy. You have a Wild West, shoot first, ask questions later, philosophy on life. We have a question this, avoid conflict philosophy here. And I say we because I've adopted it now. I'm much more likely to smile and say, well, let's work a way around this rather than say, hey, you want to fix this? It's the way we operate things differently because we look at it from a Confucian, from a Sun Tzu, from all of the different Mencius, all these different philosophers who have gone through life. And Buddhism, Buddhism is a very philosophical way of peacefully dealing with things. When we look at the world through that kind of lens, we're not looking through it through a confrontational lens. So when you think China might do this, you're thinking that because that's what your government would do. It's not what China's government would do. And if you really want to believe that, you made the comment just before, 90% of people in China support the government. More than 90, it's actually 95.5. But
I was going with a low ball just so I can make sure it was accurate.
Okay, but what sort of country and what sort of governance has 90+% support for that governance? That is what democracy does. It brings you results that make your life better. It's the world's largest middle class. It's the world's smallest, becoming the world's smallest wealth inequality. Now, there are some countries that have a much lower Gini coefficient, but that's because everybody's wealthy. Like Saudi Arabia, all their public, anyone who's a Saudi Arabian citizen is rich. Everyone in Luxembourg who's a citizen is rich. They don't have a wealth disparity. They have super rich and very rich and moderately rich. In China, you have very rich people and you still have very poor people, but that gap is closing all the time. The middle class of China is it's bigger than the European Union and America combined. That's the middle class in China. What kind of government does that? A good government. End of story.
Yeah, that's the catch. It's not, I mean, we look at it wrong. We look at it very wrong. It's, if you have a competent government and you have raised, what, 800 million people out of poverty, you may actually like the government that raised 800 million people out of poverty. That's not shocking.
I think you would. And I'll tell you, I've been through the most impoverished areas you can imagine. 20 years ago in China, my wife and I got involved in charity. We can talk about this in another event because I know that it's getting late now. But yeah, 20 years ago, I went through some really impoverished regions. And I've been through the same regions since. I now cycle. I've got about 40,000 kilometers under my belt cycling across China. And in doing that, you travel through regional areas. You travel through rural areas. You witness the country. You smell the country. You taste the country. You talk to the country. And you don't get that on a desk in Washington using your Google searches and your Google Maps to have a look and see what's going on. It's in there and it's in here. You know, I talk to people in China. How are you feeling? Oh, yeah, I'm great. You know, the wife's in this city working. I've got freedom here. And, you know, these conversations happen every day. Every day people will say to me, what do you think of China? It's just great. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Is it better than your country? Yeah, it is. Wow. These are the conversations that you have on a street corner in a village in the middle of Jiangsu province. Doesn't matter where you are, everywhere. Same thing.
Jerry, I'm going to have to visit. I'm going to have to visit.
Give me a call.
Been a very good arbiter of this and a fantastic explanation. Honestly, man, we have benefited from your expertise in this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamal. Thank you very much indeed for having me on the show. And again, thanks to Kevin for making this happen.
Absolutely. And you have a good night. Okay. Be safe.
I will do. Thank you.
That was a fantastic breakdown. Fantastic.